My mom's favorite phrase was, "You'll make us look bad." On Christmas Eve, I hired a professional cleaning service for a deep clean. But Mom insisted we clean the entire apartment ourselves before they arrived. She said she didn't want the cleaners to think we lived like pigs. I had no choice but to help her. I ended up with a raging fever from exhaustion. Yet, she forced me to take a shower before going to the ER. She said smelling like sweat would make people at the hospital judge us. By the time I finally reached the hospital, I was practically slipping into shock. On Christmas Day, a relative came over and gifted me a scarf. Terrified of looking cheap, Mom immediately dug out my most expensive cashmere wrap, the one my grandmother left me, and shoved it into the relative's hands as a return gift. At lunch, she frowned at the dining table, complaining there weren't enough dishes. She said it made us look poor. Then, completely ignoring the severe blizzard warning flashing on TV, she ordered me, just discharged from the hospital, to go back out and buy more groceries. In the brief second when the howling wind swept me off my feet, only one thought crossed my mind. Mom, this time, you'll never have to worry about me making you look bad again. For the Christmas holidays, I brought my mom, Helen, from her small hometown to stay with me at my apartment. The day before Christmas, Helen suddenly announced we needed to do a massive deep clean because relatives were coming over tomorrow. I told her I'd already hired a cleaner, and they'd be here in the afternoon. Helen's face instantly fell. Even if you hired someone, we have to wipe everything down ourselves first. If they walk in and see how dirty the place is, they'll talk behind our backs. Do you want to embarrass us? Mom, they're literally paid to clean, I sighed. Why does it matter if the place is dirty? Of course it matters. They might not say it to your face, but they'll judge you. I have a reputation to keep. I won't lose face. The service is already paid for. It's non-refundable. Fine, but that doesn't mean we get to be lazy. I didn't argue. She ignored me, grabbed a rag, and started scrubbing the windowsill with frantic, clumsy strokes, leaving streaks of dirty water everywhere. Looking at her hunched back, I let out a quiet sigh. At her pace, she'd be at it forever. I walked over and took the rag from her. I'll do it, Mom. She straightened up, wiping her brow. Make sure you do a good job. No cutting corners. Then, she headed into the kitchen to prep lunch. I spent the next few hours scrubbing the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway all by myself. By the time the cleaner finally arrived, I had already finished most of the work. The cleaner stood at the door, looking at the sparkling clean apartment, visibly confused. You've already done everything. So, what do you need me for? Helen piped up from the kitchen. Oh, just wipe it all down again. Can't hurt to have it extra clean. I slumped onto the couch, every muscle in my body aching. My head was throbbing violently. The words, embarrassing, and what will people think kept spinning in my mind. I wasn't angry. I was just suffocating under the weight of her obsession with keeping up appearances. She genuinely believed that as long as she acted perfect, nobody would ever judge her. But she didn't realize that every single time she wanted to look perfect, I was the one paying the price. Just like today. She wanted to look clean, so I had to scrub the entire apartment. Even after the cleaner left, Helen kept pacing around, checking for any missed spots. I didn't dare lie down. I just sat there, waiting for her inspection to end, terrified that if she found a speck of dust, she'd start cleaning again, and I'd end up having to do it anyway. Helen finally finished her inspection. Satisfied, she walked over to the couch. Seeing me slumped there looking completely drained, she frowned. She reached out to touch my forehead and gasped. You're burning up? I nodded weakly. Every time I moved my head, my temples throbbed like they were about to explode. Mom, please take me to the hospital. I need in 4. But she just stood there, her brow furrowed. Go take a shower first. I froze, thinking I had misheard her. Mom, I have a fever. You still have to wash up. You smell like sweat. If you go to the ER looking like a mess, you'll embarrass both of us. I opened my mouth, but my throat felt completely blocked. She was already in the bathroom, turning on the hot water. Chloe, you know how hard it has been for me, she called out, her voice cracking. When I was young, we were poor. My parents always treated me like I was an embarrassment. Then, I finally built a life with your dad, but he passed away so early. She walked back out, her eyes red. I raised you all by myself. People have been whispering behind my back for years, just waiting to see me fail. Waiting to see us look trashy. I just wanted to hold my head high. I didn't want anyone to look down on us. Asterisk trashy. Embarrassing? Asterisk. The words hit me like a physical blow. Oblivious to my distress, she continued. So we have to be perfect in everything we do. We can't give them a reason to judge us. Everything I do for us. Those familiar words triggered my anxiety. My hands began to shake. I clenched my fists tight, hiding them so she wouldn't see, but the tears leaked out anyway. Helen blinked, startled. She reached out to wipe my tears, but I flinched and spoke in a raspy whisper. You just think I'm an embarrassment to you, don't you? Her hand froze in midair. Slowly, she pulled her hand back, her expression turning into one of deep offense. What are you talking about? When have I ever looked down on you? I just want us to live with some dignity. Is that a crime? Her eyes welled with tears of self-pity. I stared at her, realizing there was no point in arguing. I told myself to just endure it. The holidays would be over in a couple of days, and she'd go back to her hometown. She rarely visited. I should just go along with it. I sighed, dragged myself into the bathroom, and took a quick hot shower. By the time we Ubered to the hospital, my fever had spiked to 106 degrees Fahrenheit. The doctor told me if we had arrived any later, my body would have gone into septic shock. I hooked up to N4 all night, and by Christmas morning, the fever finally broke. When I got back to the apartment, the relatives had already arrived. The living room was packed. People were laughing, chatting, and exchanging gifts. I curled up in the corner of the couch, completely drained. But deep down, I had a sinking feeling that something else was about to happen. Sure enough, an aunt named Clara handed me a beautifully wrapped box. Just a little gift, dear. Hope you like it. Before I could even say thank you, Helen bolted upright and rushed into my bedroom. My stomach dropped. When she came back, she was holding a vintage cashmere shawl, the only keepsake my grandmother had left me before she passed. Oh, Clara, you shouldn't have. Here, take the shawl. Just a little token of our appreciation. I forced myself to stand up.
Mom, no.
That was Grandma's. Hush, Chloe, Helen snapped, cutting me off. Clara brought us a gift. If we don't give something back, what will people think? Don't be so cheap. It's embarrassing. Do you want everyone here to think I raised an ungrateful brat?
She was always like this.
To her, regifting was classy. She didn't care that the shawl was the only thing I had left of my grandmother. She thought she was doing the right thing. She never realized that every time she bought her dignity, I paid with my heart. A massive wave of anxiety washed over me. I dug my fingernails deep into my arm, scratching myself through my sleeves until I could feel the skin breaking. The physical pain did nothing to ease the suffocating pressure in my chest. I opened my mouth to protest, but my throat was frozen. The living room went dead silent for a few seconds. The relatives glanced at each other. Some sipped their tea. Others pretended to look at their phones. Clara smiled awkwardly, folded the shawl, and slipped it into her bag. Well, thank you, she muttered. Nobody stood up for me. It had been like this my entire life. They watched her scream at me, watched her give away my things, and watched me swallow my tears. But they never said a word, because it was family business. And I just had to take it. I finally let go of my arm. My palm was wet with a mixture of sweat and blood. I shoved my hand deep into my pocket, hiding it from view. While the relatives chatted in the living room, Helen went into the kitchen to prepare lunch. I lay on the couch, shivering. Suddenly, the refrigerator door slammed shut. Helen walked out, her face dark. Why is there barely any food in the fridge? Mom, I whispered weakly. We bought groceries yesterday. That tiny bit of food? We have guests. You expect me to serve them scraps? Do you want them to laugh at us? Through my blurred vision, I looked out the window. The trees were bending wildly under the howling wind. On my phone, emergency alerts for a severe winter blizzard were blaring. But Helen was in her own world, muttering frantically as she threw things in and out of the fridge. No, this won't do. If the guests see this, they'll think we're starving. It's too embarrassing. Watching her panic, I knew what was coming. Her anxiety was peaking. And whenever she panicked about looking bad, she always found a way to make it my problem. Sure enough, she marched over and shoved a large grocery bag into my hands. Go to the supermarket. Get some ribs, fish, and shrimp. Hurry. I looked out the window. Mom, there's a literal blizzard outside. The roads are freezing. So what? People are still out there, she said without looking at me. Just go quickly. Don't make the guests wait. I don't want them thinking we're cheap. I stood at the door, looking at her one last time. Mom, I really don't feel well. We need food. Do you want everyone to look down on me? Her voice escalated, sharp and accusing. Standing in the hallway, I could hear her laughing with the relatives inside. Oh, don't worry, Chloe just went to the store. She'll be back with fresh groceries soon. We're going to have an amazing feast today. Aunt Sarah's voice drifted out. Helen, the wind is crazy out there. Is it really safe for her to go? Helen laughed it off. Oh, she's an adult. It's just a quick run to the store. What could go wrong? I looked down at the empty grocery bag in my hands. Then, I looked out at the dark, violently swirling snowstorm outside. Helen's voice drifted through the door again. That girl is always so slow. Can't even run a simple errand without dragging her feet. Always the same complaints. She thought as long as she put on a perfect show, she'd be safe. But she never realized that I was the one paying for her stage. Today, she was afraid of looking cheap, so I had to walk into a blizzard. Yesterday, she was afraid of looking dirty, so I had to clean the entire house while sick. The day before, she was afraid of smelling bad, so I had to shower with a 104-degree fever. Every single time. Slowly, I pushed open the lobby door and walked straight into the freezing, violent storm. Back in the warm apartment, Helen was still smiling and chatting with the relatives. The dinner tonight is going to be perfect. I promise you'll all leave stuffed. Sarah frowned, looking out the window at the whiteout conditions. Helen, the storm is getting worse. It's really not safe. Call Chloe and tell her to come back. Forget the food. Helen's smile stiffened for a second, but she quickly brushed it off.
No, she's fine.
She's a grown woman. Besides, how would it look if we didn't serve a proper dinner? I won't have people saying I'm a terrible host. Sarah's frown deepened. Helen, she is your daughter. Since when is a perfect dinner more important than your child's safety? You're so obsessed with what people think. You're going to push that girl too far one day and you'll regret it. Helen's face turned sour, but she remained stubborn. Sarah, I just want us to have some dignity. What is so wrong with that? I raised her alone. If I didn't keep up appearances, people would have walked all over us. Do you think life has been easy for me? She spoke with the same old bitterness, the same victim mentality.
She still didn't get it.
Her casual demands, her constant fear of being judged, had become a lifetime of trauma for me. It was the very hand that pushed me into the storm, and she would never know that her precious dignity would ultimately cost her daughter's life. Before Sarah could reply, the TV screen suddenly flashed with an emergency broadcast. A news anchor stood in the howling wind and snow, speaking urgently. We have a breaking report. Due to the extreme blizzard, multiple trees and power lines have collapsed across the city. We have just received word that a young woman was struck by a falling oak tree on her way to the grocery store. Emergency services are on the scene, but her condition is currently unknown. The smile on Helen's face completely froze. The television screen in my living room was still flashing with the news anchor's urgent warnings, but I didn't hear them. I was already half buried under 300 pounds of frozen oak, watching my own breath turn into fragile, fleeting wisps of steam before dissolving into the gray whiteout of the storm. The impact hadn't felt like a blow at first. It felt like a sudden, heavy door slamming shut against my back, pinning my chest to the icy asphalt. I remember the sharp, metallic taste of blood pooling in the back of my throat, and the strange, quiet realization that the howling of the wind had suddenly ceased. Or maybe my ears had just stopped registering the sound. I lay there, my face pressed against the freezing slush, watching a single, dirty plastic grocery bag tumble past my nose. It caught on a jagged, low-hanging branch, fluttering frantically like a trapped bird. I didn't get the ribs, I thought. A bizarre, detached sense of guilt prickled at the edge of my fading consciousness. She's going to be so angry about the ribs. The cold is a trickster. It hurts at first, 1,000 tiny needles sewing your skin to your bones, but then it turns sweet. It wraps around you like a heavy, well, blanket, no, like Grandma's cashmere shawl. The one my mother had just shoved into Aunt Clara's hands to buy a few minutes of polite, superficial nods. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness pull me down. For the first time in my 26 years, I didn't have to worry about looking bad. I didn't have to worry about looking like anything at all. The first thing that returned was the smell. Not the sterile, sharp scent of rubbing alcohol, but the heavy, cloying fragrance of Chanel No. 5, the cheap knockoff my mother bought from the drugstore because the bottle looked identical to the real thing on her vanity. I opened my eyes. The ceiling was a grid of pale yellow acoustic tiles, one of them stained with a watermark shaped like a weeping eye. The steady, mechanical beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor filled the room, a rhythmic reminder that my body had failed to slip away entirely. Oh, thank God, a voice whispered. But it wasn't the voice of a mother who had almost lost her child. It was the voice of an actress whose cue had finally arrived. I turned my head. The movement sent a white-hot spike of agony down my neck, radiating into my left shoulder, which was heavily bandaged and bound in a rigid brace. Helen was sitting in the vinyl armchair beside the bed. She had a tissue pressed to her nose, but her eyes were dry, scanning the room as if checking the lighting. Aunt Sarah was standing near the door, her coat still damp with melted snow, her face pale and lined with genuine exhaustion. "Chloe," Helen cried, leaning forward and grabbing my right hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was tight, uncomfortably tight, like a cuff. "You're awake. The doctor said you have a severe concussion and 3 fractured ribs, but you're going to be fine." I've been out of my mind with worry. I told everyone, I said, my Chloe is a fighter. She'd never leave her mother like this. I looked at her, really looked at her. The makeup she had hastily applied was smudged, but she had taken the time to draw on her eyebrows. Her hair, usually sprayed into a stiff, immovable helmet, was slightly disheveled, but in a way that felt calculated. The tragic, elegant portrait of a grieving mother. Where? My voice was a dry rattle. My throat felt like it had been scraped with sandpaper. Don't talk, sweetheart, Helen said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Just rest. Aunt Clara and Uncle Bob are out in the waiting room. They've been so supportive. Everyone's saying how brave you were, going out to make sure we had a proper Christmas dinner. I told them you've always been so devoted to this family. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. Devoted. She was already spinning the narrative. She had turned my near-death experience, forced upon me by her own frantic vanity, into a heartwarming tale of filial sacrifice. I looked past her to Aunt Sarah. Sarah didn't look at Helen. She kept her eyes on me, her expression a mix of pity and deep, simmering anger. When Helen leaned over to adjust my blanket, making sure the hospital logo was tucked neatly out of sight, Sarah spoke. Helen, Sarah said quietly. Stop. Helen froze, her hands hovering over the white cotton sheet. What do you mean, stop? I'm just taking care of my daughter. You're performing, Sarah said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the sterile air of the room like a scalpel. Helen's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She glanced at the door, then back at Sarah, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. How can you say that? In front of Chloe? I've been sitting here for 12 hours. I didn't even go home to change. Because you didn't want the doctors to think you didn't care, Sarah replied, stepping closer to the bed. You didn't care about the storm, Helen. You didn't care that she had a 106-degree fever the night before. You sent her out there because you couldn't bear the thought of Clara thinking your fridge was empty. And now you're trying to make yourself the hero of this story. That's a lie. Helen's voice cracked, a high, reedy sound of pure panic. She looked down at me, her eyes pleading, not for my forgiveness, but for my cooperation. Chloe, tell her. You wanted to go, didn't you? You wanted to make sure we had a nice dinner. Tell your aunt. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the rhythmic beep, beep, beep of the monitor. My heart rate was climbing. I could hear the machine speeding up, exposing my terror to the room. Helen's grip on my hand tightened, her fingernails digging slightly into my skin. Help me, her eyes begged. Keep up the lie. Don't make us look bad. For my entire life, I had complied. When she told the neighbors I had fallen down the stairs because I was clumsy, rather than admit she had pushed me during a screaming fit over a dusty baseboard, I had nodded and smiled. When she gave away my favorite books, my clothes, my grandmother's shawl, I had stayed silent to protect her fragile ego. But as I lay there, feeling the deep, dull ache in my shattered ribs and the cold steel of the 4-needle in my vein, something inside me didn't just break. It dissolved. I pulled my hand out of her grip. It took every ounce of strength I had, and the physical effort made my vision blur with pain, but I did it. No, I whispered. Helen stared at her empty hand as if I had just struck her. What? I didn't want to go, I said, each word a heavy, jagged stone I had to lift from my chest. I told you there was a blizzard.
I told you I didn't feel well.
You told me to go anyway because you didn't want the guests to think we were poor. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Helen's face contorted into an expression of sheer, venomous betrayal. She stood up so quickly her plastic chair scraped loudly against the linoleum floor. How can you say that? She hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and mortification. She glanced frantically at the door, terrified that a nurse or a passing relative might have heard. After everything I've done for you? I raised you alone. I sacrificed my whole life so you wouldn't have to grow up looking like trailer trash. And this is how you repay me? By making me look like a monster in front of my own sister? You don't need my help to look like a monster, Helen, Sarah said. She walked over to the other side of my bed, placing a warm, steady hand on my uninjured shoulder. I'm calling the social worker, and I'm staying here until Chloe is discharged. You need to leave. This is my daughter, Helen screamed, her voice rising to a pitch that finally drew a nurse to the doorway. You can't throw me out. Chloe, tell them you're just confused. The nurse, a tall, stern-faced woman, stepped into the room. Ma'am, you need to lower your voice immediately. This is an intensive care recovery unit. If you cannot maintain your composure, I will have security escort you out. Helen looked at the nurse, then at Sarah, then at me. I closed my eyes, refusing to give her the audience she so desperately needed. I heard her draw a sharp, shuddering breath, the sound of a woman realizing she had lost control of the room, of the narrative, of her stage. Fine, Helen spat, her voice thick with self-pity. If you want to be ungrateful, if you want to humiliate me like this, then fine. See how you manage without me. Let's see how much you like it when people start whispering about how you threw your own mother out of your hospital room. You'll see what people say about you, Chloe. You'll see. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind her. For the next 3 days, the hospital room became a sanctuary of quiet. Aunt Sarah stayed. She slept on the uncomfortable vinyl chair, brought me real broth from a deli down the street, and sat in silence with me when the pain medication made me too groggy to speak. She didn't press me for details, and she didn't defend Helen. On the fourth morning, while the winter sun cast long, cold bars of light across my bed, Sarah set down her cup of coffee and looked at me. "She's been calling the relatives," Sarah said softly, "telling everyone that you've had a mental breakdown. She's claiming the concussion made you paranoid, that you're hallucinating things she supposedly said to you." I let out a dry, humorless laugh that caught in my chest, making my broken ribs ache. "Of course she is." "Clara believes her," Sarah continued, her eyes tinged with sadness. "Or rather, Clara wants to believe her because it's easier. If Helen is the victim of a crazy daughter, then Clara doesn't have to feel guilty about taking your grandmother's shawl while you were lying on the couch shivering with a fever." "And you?" I asked, my voice still small. "Why do you believe me?" Sarah sighed, looking out the window at the snow-covered city streets. "Because I remember what she was like when we were girls. Our mother, your grandmother, was a hard woman, Chloe. She was obsessed with status because we didn't have any. She would beat Helen if her shoes weren't polished, or if she spoke too loudly in public. When Helen grew up, she didn't break the cycle. She just changed her role from the victim to the warden." She turned back to me, her eyes fiercely protective. "But understanding why she did it doesn't mean you have to let her destroy you. You almost died, Chloe. Literally. If the plow driver hadn't seen the grocery bag caught on that branch and stopped to look, you would have frozen to death under that tree." The reality of those words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I had almost died for a plate of ribs and a clean windowsill. "I can't go back," I said. "Not to her. Not to the way things were." "You don't have to," Sarah said. "I'll help you. But you need to know, she's still at your apartment." My stomach clenched.
What?
"She refused to go back to her hometown. She told the landlord she was staying to take care of you, using her spare key to get in. She's playing the devoted caregiver to your neighbors. She's been baking cookies and handing them out in the lobby, telling everyone how she's praying for her poor, sick girl." I closed my eyes. The theater never closed. The show just moved to a different venue. When the day of my discharge arrived, my body was still a map of bruises, but my mind was entirely clear. The hospital social worker had helped me arrange for a lock change at my apartment. Sarah had called a local locksmith to meet us at the building. As the taxi pulled up to my brick apartment building, my chest tightened. The front lobby was quiet, but as I stepped out, leaning heavily on Sarah's arm, I saw Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman from 3B, checking her mail. "Oh, Chloe, Mrs. Gable gasped, rushing over. "We were all so worried. Your mother told us what happened. Such a tragic accident. She's been absolutely devastated, poor thing. She barely sleeps, just stays upstairs cooking for when you get home." I looked at Mrs. Gable's sympathetic eyes and felt a familiar, sickening urge to play along, to nod, to thank her, to protect the image of the loving mother Helen had painted. But then I felt the sharp ache in my ribs. "It wasn't an accident, Mrs. Gable," I said, my voice steady and clear. "My mother sent me out into the blizzard after I was discharged with a 106-degree fever. She wanted groceries because she was embarrassed the fridge was empty." Mrs. Gable's jaw dropped. She looked at me, then at Sarah, her eyes darting back and forth in utter confusion. The polite veneer of neighborly gossip had been shattered by the raw, ugly truth. "Let's go up, Chloe," Sarah said gently, guiding me toward the elevator. When we reached my floor, the hallway smelled faintly of roasted chicken. I walked to my door and knocked. The door opened almost instantly. Helen stood there, wearing a floral apron I had never seen before, likely bought specifically for this homecoming scene. Her face was lit with a joyful, maternal smile that looked like it had been rehearsed in a mirror. "Chloe, sweetheart, you're home," she cried, reaching out to hug me. I stepped back, using Sarah as a shield. "Don't, Mom." Helen's smile faltered, her eyes quickly scanning the hallway to see if any neighbors were watching. "What's wrong? Come inside. I've made your favorite." "I'm not coming in while you're here," I said. Beside me, the locksmith stepped forward, carrying his metal toolbox. "Are you the tenant, ma'am?" he asked me. "Yes," I said. "I want the locks changed immediately. And I want this woman removed from my apartment." Helen's face drained of color. She stepped out into the hallway, her voice dropping to a panicked, furious whisper. "Chloe, have you lost your mind? What are you doing? In front of a stranger? Do you want the whole building to think we're white trash having a domestic dispute?" "I don't care what they think, Helen," I said. I didn't call her Mom. The word felt too heavy, too sacred for the woman standing before me. "Sarah, tell her," Helen hissed, turning on her sister. "You've poisoned her mind. You've always been jealous of me because Dad loved me more. You're trying to ruin my relationship with my daughter." Helen, pack your bags, Sarah said, her voice cold and unyielding. The locksmith is going to do his job. If you aren't out of here in 15 minutes, we are calling the police. I'm sure the neighbors would love to watch you get escorted out in handcuffs. Think of what that would do for your reputation. The mention of the police, and the potential public humiliation, was the only weapon that could pierce Helen's armor. She stared at us, her chest heaving, her eyes wild with a mixture of terror and hatred. You're a monster, Helen whispered to me, her voice trembling. I gave you life. I protected you. And you're doing this to me. You'll regret this, Chloe. When I'm dead and gone, you'll realize what a horrible, ungrateful daughter you were. I'll take my chances, I said. For the next 10 minutes, we stood in the hallway while the locksmith worked, the rhythmic clinking of his tools the only sound breaking the tense silence. Helen drifted in and out of the apartment, dragging her suitcases, her movements frantic and clumsy. She didn't look at me again. When she finally walked out for the last time, she stopped at the elevator. She adjusted her coat, patted her hair, and drew herself up to her full height. Even in defeat, she was trying to look dignified. Tell Clara I'll be staying with her tonight, Helen said to Sarah, her voice stiff. And tell her not to bring up this unpleasantness. She stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut on her perfect, painted mask. 2 weeks after the eviction, my body had begun to heal, but my apartment felt like a crime scene. Everywhere I looked, I saw the remnants of her invasion, the spotless windowsills, the organized pantry, the lingering scent of her perfume. But the thing that haunted me most was the empty space on my closet shelf where my grandmother's cashmere shawl used to sit. It was the only thing I had left of the woman who had truly loved me. My grandmother hadn't been perfect. As Sarah had revealed, she had her own deep scars, but in her final years, she had been a soft, quiet presence in my life. The shawl was a physical connection to a time before the performance took over. I knew what I had to do. I called Aunt Clara. She answered on the third ring, her voice immediately guarded. Chloe? Helen told us you were resting. She said you weren't taking visitors. I'm fine, Aunt Clara, I said, keeping my voice calm. I'm calling because I want my grandmother's shawl back. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Well, Chloe, your mother gave that to me as a gift. It would be very rude of me to just give it back. What would people think if I returned a Christmas present? The sheer, exhausting irony of her words made me close my eyes. They were all infected by the same disease. If you don't return it, I said quietly, I will file a police report for stolen property. I have photos of the shawl, and I have the receipt from when my grandmother bought it. I will tell the police and the rest of the family exactly how you took it from my home while I was semi-conscious on the couch. You wouldn't, Clara gasped, her voice rising in panic. That would be a public scandal. Think of the family name. I don't care about the family name, Clara. I want my shawl. I will be at your house tomorrow at noon. If it isn't waiting for me, I'm going straight to the police station. I hung up before she could respond. The next day, Sarah drove me to Clara's suburban home. The street was quiet, the lawns manicured and identical. It was the kind of neighborhood where people lived in constant fear of their grass being a fraction of an inch too long. When we pulled into the driveway, the front door opened. Clara stood there, holding a neatly folded parcel wrapped in white tissue paper. She didn't invite us inside. She didn't even step off her porch. She walked down the driveway, her face a mask of cold disapproval. She shoved the parcel into my hands. I hope you're happy, Clara whispered, her voice dripping with venom. You've torn this family apart. Helen is devastated. She's staying in her room, crying all day. We all think you've behaved abominably. I looked down at the tissue paper, feeling the soft, familiar texture of the cashmere underneath. The weight of it felt like a shield. I am happy, Clara, I said, looking her dead in the eye. Because for the first time in my life, I don't care what you think. We drove away, leaving Clara standing in her perfect driveway, looking small, bitter, and utterly hollow. Winter turned to spring, and spring slowly bled into the stifling heat of summer. I started going to therapy. My therapist, a quiet man named Dr. Chun, didn't offer easy answers. He didn't tell me to forgive my mother, nor did he tell me to forget. Instead, he helped me sit with the discomfort of being imperfect. Your mother built a prison out of other people's opinions, Dr. Chun told me during one session. And she made you the guard of her cell. Every time you tried to be human, to be tired, to be sick, to be sad, you were threatening the illusion of her safety. How do I stop looking for her approval? I asked, my hands tracing the scars on my arm where I had scratched myself during that terrible Christmas dinner. By realizing that her approval is a currency that has no value, he said. It only buys more performance. You have to learn to be bad, Chloe. You have to learn to let the dishes sit in the sink. You have to learn to let people think whatever they want to think about you. It was a slow, painful process of unlearning. The first time I left a coffee mug on the living room table overnight, I woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, my heart pounding with a phantom terror that Helen would walk in and scream at me. I had to force myself to sit on the edge of the bed, breathing deeply, reminding myself that the apartment was mine, that the mug was just a mug. I began to build a life out of small, beautiful imperfections. I bought mismatched plates from a thrift store. I let my hair air dry into wild, unruly curls. I invited friends over when the apartment was a mess, watching with a strange, giddy sense of relief when they didn't care about the dust on the bookshelf. Helen tried to reach out, of course. First came the letters, written in her elegant, looping cursive. They were filled with updates about her life in her hometown, written as if nothing had ever happened. She wrote about the church bake sale, the new curtains she had bought, the compliments she had received from the neighbors. There was no mention of the hospital, the blizzard, or the lock change. It was a parallel universe where we were still a happy, perfect family. I threw the letters away unopened. Then came the flying extension cords, the distant relatives she sent to guilt me. "She's your mother, Chloe." An uncle I hadn't seen in 5 years wrote in an email. "She's getting older. Life is too short to hold grudges. She's willing to forgive you for your behavior if you just apologize." I deleted the emails. I blocked the numbers. I cut the threads one by one until the silence was no longer a void, but a solid, protective wall. A year passed. Another December arrived, but this time, there was no panic. No deep cleaning. No frantic runs to the grocery store. The city was quiet under a gentle dust of snow, and my apartment was warm, filled with the scent of pine and real, uncomplicated peace. Aunt Sarah came over on Christmas Eve. We drank hot cocoa, listened to records, and didn't talk about the past. We didn't have to. The silence between us was comfortable, built on a foundation of shared truth. But on Christmas morning, my phone rang. It was an unknown number from my mother's hometown area code. My heart did a familiar, brief flutter of anxiety, but I answered it anyway. "Chloe?" The voice was shaky, unfamiliar. It took me a moment to recognize it as Mrs. Gable's sister, who still lived near Helen. "Chloe, it's Clara." "No, wait. It's Martha, Clara's friend. I'm calling from the hospital." My grip on the phone tightened. "What happened?" "Your mother, she had a stroke last night. The doctors say she's stable, but she's refusing to let them treat her properly. She won't put on the hospital gown because she says it looks cheap. She's trying to do her makeup in the bed. She's making a scene, Chloe. She keeps saying she won't let the doctors see her looking like a mess. She's calling for you." I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the vintage cashmere shawl draped over the back of my chair. "Is she in danger?" I asked. "If she doesn't let them administer the medication, yes," Martha said, her voice frantic. "Please, Chloe. You're her daughter. You need to come and tell her to behave. She's embarrassing herself. She's embarrassing herself." Even now, in the face of death, the language of the town was the same. The tragedy wasn't that a woman was dying. The tragedy was that she was making a scene. "No," I said. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end.
What?
"Chloe, she's your mother. What will people say if you don't come?" "They can say whatever they want," I said quietly. "Tell her I hope she gets better. But I'm not coming." I hung up the phone. I stood up, walked over to the window, and looked out at the falling snow. The wind was howling, just like it had a year ago. But this time, I was on the inside. I was warm. I was safe. I picked up Grandma's cashmere shawl and wrapped it around my shoulders. It was soft, warm, and entirely mine. I walked into the kitchen, left the breakfast dishes in the sink, and sat down to enjoy the quiet of my imperfect, beautiful life. For the first time in my life, I knew that no matter what anyone else thought, I would never look bad to myself again.